Welcome to another Midweek with Max. I'm Rick, joined by John Greenwood, Joshua, JCV, and of course our co-founder Max Sanchez. And Ryan Charleston was here. He may be back. I don't know what's going on with Discord. Anyway, without further ado, gonna kick it over to Max for weekly updates, including exciting news about the new website that launched yesterday. So, Max, if you can hear me, take it away, sir.
Yep, loud and clear. All right, awesome. Thanks everyone for coming to another Midweek with Max. Got some exciting updates this week and going into next week. So the probably the biggest thing this week is at least from a technical engineering side, is Ethereum's activation of the Fusaka update or upgrade. And so that's going to be happening tomorrow a little after 4 p.m. Eastern time. And so we've been busy getting all of our infrastructure updated and communicating node update instructions to partners and everyone else who's running nodes. So if you check in Discord in the node operators channel, we posted instructions for the update there. This is not the full V2 update. If you want, you can use the latest V2 releases of opnode and opgeth as well, but they do contain a large database upgrade that takes some time. So this is a V1 based upgrade with Fusaka support, so you can use that to get through Fusaka and then do the V2 upgrade later if you want. Again, you're welcome to update to V2 if you want from mainnet. They are both compatible and interoperable, but this is just a build to make it easier for everyone who's running nodes if they don't have the time to do the full V2 database upgrade prior to the Fusaka activation. So check out details on that. We're also going to be updating the Hemi node repo momentarily with PR to get those in for anyone who's using the new Hemi node repo for running their nodes. Let's see, beyond that, we've been doing a lot of work on a backend daemon for something we're calling Bitcoin MinerFi. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of the plans there and what we're working on building. So there's a lot of different things in the space called MinerFi, and we're looking at a couple interesting different things that we can do related to Bitcoin mining. But the first one's going to be basically a fast onboarding and offboarding system for Bitcoin and hemiBitcoin. And so the way that slides into MinerFi is basically you could register a fixed Bitcoin deposit address, and then whenever funds are sent to that Bitcoin address, they're automatically converted or swapped in DeFi basically for hemiBTC. And then we're working on a DeFi router, which basically would either let you or the pool, if the pool's managing your Bitcoin withdrawal position, to configure different DeFi strategies. So what you want to do when the BTC is onboarded onto the chain, so you could either obviously just hold it in your wallet, or you could do something more complicated like putting it into our upcoming staked Bitcoin product, putting it into different DeFi chutes and ladders, Spectra, BitFi, anything like that. And so all the adapters and basically a way for you to configure that. But the important tech piece is being able to easily onboard Bitcoin through this liquidity system. And it'll also be a way for VEHEMI position holders to earn additional revenue by contributing LP and running a daemon as part of this new protocol. So working on that, working on the backend daemon piece for that, and we're going to be starting on the smart contract soon. Let's see, beyond that, between Thanksgiving and the V2 update and Fusaka readiness, we have not got the pop payout stuff deployed yet, but that's coming shortly. And let's see, we're also pretty much done with the hbitVM white paper. JCV is just doing his final review, and then we're going to be publishing that. So hope to get that out before the end of the week, along with a sort of more human readable blog post so people can understand it. Depending on what day we ship it, we'll probably end up scheduling the breakout AMA to go over it for sometime early next week. But we'll communicate that here, or maybe do a double session midweek with Max and then an hour to talk about hbitVM. So stay tuned for that. And also, as Rick mentioned, we launched our brand new website. So if you go to hemi.xyz, we did a pretty much complete rebrand. So it looks, in my opinion, better than the old site and is easier to navigate and has a lot of cool stuff on it. So go check that out if you haven't seen the new website that we launched yesterday. And for staked hemiBTC that we've been talking about for the last few weeks, we got those contracts deployed on mainnet. And so we're just waiting on some final UI components, and then we're going to get that formally launched and usable. So that should be happening probably before the end of this week or early next week. And I think with that, that's about all of the updates on my side. So I'll throw it back to Rick.
All right. Thank you, sir. Let's start with the whens. When will the Phase 2 tunnel launch with BitVM?
Probably realistically at this point, sometime in Q1. So trying to get it out as fast as possible, but there's a lot of moving pieces. So yeah, I'd say probably sometime in Q1.
All right. Uh, this question actually has a disclaimer attached to it. When VBA updates, and please do not say very soon.
Uh, Not really much else to say on that. It is still a priority, but all this V2 upgrades have been taking up a lot of our time on the engineering side. So it is coming. Stay tuned. Definitely before the end of the year. Uh, Hopefully sooner than that, but there are other things that have continued to take priority in getting everything shipped for the Fusaka update and some of the other stuff that we had to do on the back end.
All right. When will the next VEHEMI claim be?
Probably within the next 14-ish days. So probably before, let's call it mid-December.
All right. And the burning question on every Hamigo's mind, Joshua, Max, when OG roll?
It is coming. There have been things on the engineering side that have taken Joshua away from finishing up the work on that. I don't know if Joshua wants to give another update, but it is in progress and is almost done.
It is getting very close to being done. Unfortunately, I've mostly been focusing on other priorities, so I would expect it to be by the end of this month, or at the latest early January. But it is coming.
All right. That that gets our whens out of the way. We should update the bot too, Josh. Um, just with your new targeted dates on that, because otherwise people will give us the business. This is an interesting category, branding. What is the branding direction Hemi is choosing?
I'm not really sure how to answer that. I mean, as you'll see from the new site, definitely more of a focus on institutional products, looking at more of a focus on Bitcoin yield and Bitcoin specific DeFi. So I'd say as a macro, leaning more into the Bitcoin side versus the sort of ETH traditional protocol side that we have, but isn't quite as much of a differentiating feature. But yeah, I don't make the branding decision, so I probably can't comment too much more on that. But definitely, what you see on the new site is sort of more of a cleaner institutional focused look, and also trying to expose more about the things you can do with Bitcoin on Hemi, and especially with a focus on the Bitcoin yield side of it.
All right. There is a follow-up to that. Why was the Hemi logo changed? I would guess to match the new branding, but any anything
I
anyone
don't
else
think
wants
it
to add?
was changed. There may have been a slight tweak to it, but I'm not sure what they're referencing.
I think the I think the orange is a little more orange.
Did the orange? Yeah, I think you might be right now that I'm looking at it closer.
I think it's more orange.
Marketing folks like changing little things like that. That's all. It has the logo change has no direct bearing to anyone else. But if that makes them happy, I'm all for it. Whatever. But I can barely tell the difference. I mean, yeah, okay, it's a different orange, but I end at the Crayola box of crayons for color names. So those are both orange to me.
All right. We we should make an episode about that.
Yeah, it's
Teach
very
teach
very minor.
JCV colors.
It's very
Um,
minor. Like
all
Like
right.
my
the
kids have been
logo's
trying
exactly
for a
the
long
same. It's
time.
just
It's not going to
like the
happen.
format of it is a little bit more
Reasonable.
fortunate.
All right.
Of
On
like
to
business ready.
engineering. When will damn it, I knew this was coming. When will the new pop payout algorithm be implemented? I don't know why I always find that question so funny. I think it's because it's like always stated the exact same way week after week.
It is coming very soon to testnet. We delayed launching it to get this V2 release done and not have too many moving pieces, but the code for it's all done, so I just got to rebase it on top of the post Fusaka update and get it deployed. So very soon on testnet, and then again probably 2 weeks after that on mainnet. So mainnet will be definitely before the end of the year.
All right. I'd say grab your popcorn for this one because, all right, Max, take us for water because I imagine you're going to have a lot to say about this one. What will the MinerFi system look like?
So kind of already talked about this a little bit in the intro, but to do a bit more of a deep dive, essentially there's going to be two major components. So there's a smart contract side for actually coordinating everything for the Bitcoin fast onboarding system. And then there's a daemon component. And then the smart contract side is you could split it into two smaller pieces, which is the actual onboarding and then the DeFi routing and sort of asset management piece of it. And so from an architecture perspective, there's going to be a daemon that people who have enough VEHEMI can restake their VEHEMI into the protocol as economic security. And then that lets them run one of these daemons, which basically participates in this giant threshold signature scheme for managing short-term Bitcoin custodianship on behalf of the system. And then there'll also be LPs in the system who could be operators, or they could be independent LPs who just want to earn revenue from the LP side of it. We'll provide hemiBTC as basically deposits into the contract that's then distributed to people who deposit Bitcoin. And so from an end user perspective, basically the way it'll look, we call it MinerFi, but it's more than just MinerFi. MinerFi is just a good initial use case of it that fits, but it could also be used for, withdrawing your Bitcoin from an exchange and easily onboarding onto Hemi, or just easier onboarding, especially post HBitVM, where deposits and withdrawals have to be, creating or opening up a entire BitVM vault, which is expensive and has minimum deposit withdrawal amounts to it. And so the onboarding system, basically LPs provide hemiBTC as liquidity. And then we have this decentralized e-management and transaction signing daemon that's backed by economic security from VEHEMI stakers. And anyone who operates that daemon, they're participating in this key resharing protocol that allows anyone to register a Bitcoin address that's generated from the master keys that these nodes control. And then any Bitcoin that's deposited, HVM will detect that Bitcoin deposit. Then the smart contracts would release the equivalent amount of hemiBTC minus the deposit fees. And then there's incentives also for rebalancing and basically putting in more hemiBTC and getting out the native BTC under it. But that's the macro of the system. Is it's a way to easily onboard Bitcoin into hemiBTC without having to go through the regular Bitcoin tunnel process, which again, especially post HBitVM, is going to be time consuming, and those deposits and withdrawals need to be large, and so they're not accessible to everybody. So this system acts as basically a liquidity router around the Bitcoin tunnel system, and then also has this additional DeFi router component in the smart contract side, where you as a user can go in and configure things. Or we're also looking at a version of this that pools could basically run for their users and automatically set up everything and manage it for them. Basically, either the user or the pool can go in and manage what happens to the Bitcoin when it gets onboarded. So that's where you could choose different strategies of either just hold it or put it into staked hemiBTC or put it into some other Bitcoin yield vault that matches your risk tolerance and the APY you're looking for, or auto convert to USDC or put it into a LP pair on this DEX or whatever. So all these little strategy adapters basically that you can choose from, and you can choose different allocations, like Bitcoin comes in, put 10% of it here, 30% there, so on and so forth. And then there'll also be a way in there for you to manage all those positions, move stuff around, pull it out of any of the staking strategies that are enabled by the MinerFi system. And then on the pool side, the pool, if they want to do a deeper integration with the MinerFi system, they would be able to manage those positions on the user's behalf. So instead of the user having to open up MetaMask, get onboarded onto Hemi, have ETH to pay gas fees, and go and actually register a Bitcoin address and then go and manage their strategy. The pool could do that on the user's behalf, and the user would always have the ability to revoke the pool's control over their DeFi router system, and it's still fully non-custodial. So the pool can't get your assets; they can only change the allocation of new incoming Bitcoin, and so that would be a way for the pool to expose that and make it easier for users to engage with that. But the user, again, always has the option to go in and basically revoke that permission from the pool and then manage the position themselves. So that's the MinerFi system in a nutshell. We'll probably have more information on it towards the end of the year, early January. But that's one of the main engineering priorities for end of this year and January.
All right, great update. Thank you, sir. Um, one more engine. Oh, I apologize. Two more engineering questions. Is there an ETA for claiming rewards regarding burn staking? As of now, the claiming and the amount is visible, but when you claim, you'll get the following error. Transaction 142 dropped or replaced.
I assume they're referring to VEHEMI positions that have already been withdrawn. So we are working on an update to the VEHEMI reward system. We'll probably have it in by end of December or early January, depending on audit timelines. That will enable retroactive claiming of yield on VEHEMI positions you've already unclaimed. So you will be able to collect those rewards, but it'll probably be at least 3 to 4 weeks until we have that new upgraded reward system in place that accounts for older withdrawn positions.
All right. Our final engineering question. Is Hemi planning to implement post-quantum security?
Yes, at some point, although probably a lot of what we do around post-quantum will be adopting it from what Ethereum does so that we don't have two different standards. And, if we went and introduced our own post-quantum signature algorithm for transactions, and then Ethereum does something different, then all of a sudden all of the tooling between the two networks breaks. The way that MetaMask is going to support post-quantum for Ethereum would be different than what they'd have to do for Hemi. So I'd say yes, and largely following what Ethereum does for its post-quantum roadmap. You could do, if you wanted, you could do post-quantum today, just through smart contracts. You could write, and there's people who have built some of these contracts. There's smart contracts for, I don't think they're really used widely in production yet, but there's a lot of ones that people are building for verifying a couple of the more popular post-quantum signature algorithms. And so you could basically just create a smart contract that is a vault, and you have to send a transaction to it along with a post-quantum signature in order to move funds out of it. So there are some things that people could start doing in the more near-term future, and maybe that's something that we'll at some point do as a product and offer and make it easy for people to put funds in these post-quantum vaults. But as far as anything at the protocol level, that'll mainly be following what engineering does upstream, what Ethereum does upstream.
All
We
right.
also had a very
Sorry.
in-depth conversation on post-quantum last week. So if you missed that and you want to hear a very deep dive into post-quantum stuff in blockchain and across Bitcoin and Ethereum, go check out last week's episode.
That's true. There was a very deep dive on quantum computing last week. JCV had quite a bit to say. Hilariously. We now have 3 more engineering questions that popped up. I'm not sure if this is quite engineering, but I guess if it pertains to the engineering team, is Hemi currently hiring?
We're not actively in the process of hiring, but if the right candidate comes along with the right experience, we're always open to have a chat about it. We not sure the exact timeline, but we definitely will be scaling out the engineering team at some point. And when we do that a little more actively, obviously we'll post about that and have information for how to apply. But yeah, not really at the moment, but we're always interested in talking to potential candidates. And even if it doesn't make sense now, it can be a resume we keep in the back pocket and pull up in, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months when we start scaling out more.
Also, remember, Hemi is open source, so if you contribute, a meaningful contribution now, would, if we started looking later, if we started looking more seriously later, people who've done meaningful contributions now and then say, hey, are you guys hiring? Look what I've already contributed. It's always going to catch our eye better.
Yep,
You
and
know,
also for that, even if it's not a formal full-time position, if there's something that you want to build in the ecosystem, whether that's contributing new features to our daemons or contributing to the UI or whatever, if there's something meaningful that you want to build or a large thing that you want to contribute, we're always open to having discussions about some sort of developer grant, developer bounty. So if that direction of more freelance contributions of something is interesting to you, then definitely reach out on that as well.
basically, open source is good. So participating in it can be good for you in a lot of ways. Whether directly here, just improving code, because better code out there is always good, or even not with us. If you've got good shit in your, that's there in your GitHub, that is a really good part of your resume, no matter who you're talking to. So, yes, builder role and contribute.
And yes, as always, the builder role is always available for you to apply. We already have several builders in the Hemi community, and we are always looking to add more. What procedures should be taken when developing smart contracts to improve the security of contracts?
Depends a little bit on what you're building. I'd say the general guidelines are basically always try to write very simple code that's as modular and limited in scope as possible. So, instead of having one giant function that does 32 different things, try to split those out into individual functions that you can go and actually unit test properly and reason about. So that's more of a defensive coding style, but especially in the smart contract world, that's definitely important to keep in mind as you're actually architecting your code. Obviously, getting it audited. If even if you're taking an existing DeFi application and making a few small tweaks to it, sometimes even what seems like very simple change to a smart contract can have weird knock-on effects that you're not thinking about. And so, no matter whether it's brand new code or code that you adapted, even if you made nominal changes, auditing is always super important. Depending on the scope and the resources, generally you want to get audits from multiple different firms for anything non-trivial. So if you have something super simple, one good auditing firms could be enough. But if you're doing something more complicated, a lot of times you'll get several audits and one of the auditors will find something that one of the other auditors didn't think about or missed or didn't fully understand about how your protocol operates. Definitely documentation, making sure that the code you wrote is documented so that other people can understand it and reason about it. That's important both for the auditors and also just in open source in general for people to be able to look at your code, reason about it, figure out how it works, make their own changes to it, or find vulnerabilities that maybe the auditors that you had missed during the initial audit. So all of that's important. I'd say more specifically, there's different types of smart contract applications that have different needs. So if you're doing something, for example, with say zero knowledge proofs, there's a lot of weird things that you have to think about when using ZK proofs. So there's when you're writing a ZK proving system, you have to be really, really, really careful about all of the constraints you apply to it. Because if you miss one constraint, then people can prove stuff that you didn't want them to be able to prove because they're able to, for example, if you did a ZK proof of the Ethereum state transition function and you didn't include one piece of the beacon block state transition validation checks, then all of a sudden there's a way for people to craft a malicious ZK proof that looks correct to your protocol. So if you're doing anything with ZK, be really, really careful about all the constraints and checks that you're doing in your ZK verification. If you're using HVM to build anything that's Bitcoin related, definitely would recommend using Bitcoin Kit instead of trying to use the HVM precompiles directly, because it handles a lot of air checking and actually parsing out the data that's returned back from HVM. It's very easy to make a mistake with serialization or deserialization if you're interacting directly with precompiles. Also, more generally, if you're using the standard Ethereum built-in precompiles, when possible, don't try to do it directly in assembly. Use the built-in intrinsics and Solidity or libraries that wrap around them, depending on what you're doing. I don't know if JCV, if you have anything else you wanted to add to that, but
Oh yeah, nope. Those are all absolutely like vital things. But there are some other things. One is familiarize yourself with the attacks that are already out there, because as it turns out, a hell of a lot of the time, when someone finds some way to exploit a smart contract, it's going to get used again later and keep getting used over and over again, like the reentrancy problems. So familiarize yourself with the current attacks, and even if they seem old and historical and you think, God, everyone's done, that's not a problem anymore, it still is. So that's one. Two, math is dangerous. Safe math is dangerous. It's, so you've got to double check all of those over and over again, because what you think you're doing may not work in the corner case. And then one more, and, a big one. Oh, wait, where was I going? I had two more. Okay. An easy one, build off of, start with safe building blocks. Things like some of the Open Zeppelin contracts, those are well known, well understood. Start with them when possible, rather than rolling your own stuff if it's something even a little complicated, because there are things that are already audited and that are there and are, work. And then finally, and this is a big one, even though it's not directly about the smart contract writing, a tremendous fraction of the exploits or times people have had problems have to do with oracles. Oracles, whether you mean the blockchain type of oracle or the database company, are the worst things in the world. And I realize that second one is unnecessary, but still, oracles and the blockchain thing are a problem so often. And it's because they're doing something hard, but it means if you're interacting with an oracle, you have to take extra care. Don't just assume that the oracle, which is perfect and has never had a problem, is perfect and will never have a problem. You need to be able to handle a case where someone can manipulate an oracle into giving a price that doesn't make sense, into giving the wrong price, into, providing some other just crazy response. And that's going to be the way a lot of people go after things. So your perfect, beautiful smart contract that's been audited, that has no bugs in it, gets bad data, and an attacker can make it do absolutely, totally the wrong thing. So, check your oracles and, use them safely.
there's
those
actually
are my
I like that you mentioned there's a really good reference. I think it's maintained by Trail of Bits. They have a list of, it's like 9 or 10 of the most popular or most common Solidity vulnerabilities that end up in all kinds of different code bases. So one of the big ones, if you're working with any ERC20 tokens, making sure you have reentrancy guards set up correctly and you understand how they work is a huge one, especially if your protocol lets people do things with arbitrary ERC20s. There's a lot of you don't really see it that much anymore, but in a lot of the early day Ethereum DeFi applications, there'd be something like, you can have a vault that holds arbitrary ERC20 tokens and lets the user manage them or whatever. And they didn't have a proper reentrancy guard. And so somebody could configure that with a malicious ERC20, and they can basically interrupt the function. So when your code calls, hey, ERC20, it calls the transfer function on it. The ERC20 itself maliciously is configured to go and call the calling smart contract and basically bypass the additional checks or cleanup or temporary delay them that your code is doing around the ERC20 accounting. So for example, if you transferred the ERC20 to the user and then you decrease their balance stored in the smart contract, if somebody configured it with a malicious ERC20, that ERC20 could go and call back into that function and transfer it again because you haven't done the accounting to reduce their balance by the amount that was transferred. So there's all kinds of stuff like that working with ERC20s. So if you're doing anything with an ERC20, especially if it's going to be working with arbitrary ERC20s that users can configure, but even just regardless, definitely look into reentrancy. And as JCV mentioned, there's a lot of times where people don't implement math correctly and they don't think about an overflow or an underflow and what that would mean for the protocols. There's been a lot of exploits in that. And then those are probably the main ones to call out. Oracles, definitely. And then depending on what your application is doing, if you're trying to use randomness, there's a lot of ways that people think they can get randomness that they can't. And so one of those is, oh, I'll just use, the current block hash or the, hash of the Ethereum state tree or whatever. And those things can be manipulated by miners. And so say you had like a gambling protocol that, flipped a coin heads or tails and either doubled your money or lost it or whatever. If you had something that ran the roll based on the current block hash, then a miner could go and basically brute force construction of their block to manipulate that randomness that your smart contract's using. So use something like a VRF, and actually one of the things that we're working on just as sort of a side thing and an interesting application of HVM, actually John Greenwood's taking the lead on this one, is using the Bitcoin blockchain for randomness, because that's a lot harder to influence. And there's also ways where you could combine that alongside of VRF to create additional, more secure randomness. So randomness, not a lot of DeFi applications use it, but if you're using it, you have to be really careful about it.
Yeah, random numbers are one of these things that's it is a lot like encryption, where it's, the picture of it is pretty simple. Random number, you roll a dice, you roll a die, you get a random number. If you need a different random number, you just pick a different sized dice. But that's not good enough for most cases. Random numbers are hard to do well. And if you do them wrong, it's as bad as not using a random number at all. So, you have to make sure what you're doing does random right. And if you have some really clever idea to do it yourself for random numbers, don't. If it's actually that good, you'd probably need to have it peer reviewed or checked by actual math people, because random, despite that Rick was able to roll a natural 20 there, random is hard.
Well, that's from 20 plus years of playing D&D, JCV. I mean, some of us just got it. All right. Moving on. Still on smart contracts. What should users do prior to interacting with smart contracts?
That's pretty vague, but I guess just sort of general security recommendations. If at all possible, use hardware wallets. So go to Best Buy or order a Ledger or Trezor or one of the other popular trusted brands of hardware wallets. If you're working with any appreciable amount of funds, you don't just want that sitting in a hot wallet in MetaMask in your browser. So definitely hot wallet. Definitely hardware wallets. Depending on which smart contracts you're interacting with, always look at the smart contracts that you are interacting with. And, obviously a lot of them will be trusted smart contracts that are a part of the HEMI protocol, or they're from a well-known partner like, Sushi Swap or somebody like that. But if you see if somebody deploys some random DApp on HEMI and wants you to deposit funds into it, definitely take a look at the contract. If you don't understand what it's doing, do not interact with it. We did actually recently, it was a very small thing, but there was a protocol that launched a version of an Aave fork, and then they basically disappeared, and some users got funds stuck in there. I think we were able to recover most or all of them with putting up a temporary UI that still let you interact with the contracts. But again, it's just a reminder of, don't just ape into any random DeFi protocol without understanding it. If you're interacting with third-party protocols, make sure the contracts are audited. Make sure, there's a audit report in their GitHub repo or similar, and it's from a trusted auditing firm.
Actually, I'd go one step before auditing. Make sure the contract is at least verified on the Block Explorer, because
yeah, at a bare minimum.
Right. I mean, that is a low bar, but a lot of malicious contracts are just not even, you know, they are, don't have the code there on the Explorer. So, the code there is not being verified is not sufficient. But if it's not verified, then you really should be afraid of it. Then you can get, once it's verified, now you get to the stuff Max is talking about. But at least check that bare minimum. Like if it's not there, you really should be afraid.
Yeah, never trust unverified contracts. There's almost always a reason they did not want to verify the contracts, and it's because they're doing something weird. Also, just because a contract's audited doesn't mean it's bug-free or that it's configured correctly. So, again, depending on what you're doing and what the protocol is, you may want to look at the configuration of the contract to make sure it's what was expected. Even if it's not malicious, sometimes deployers can make mistakes and maybe they have, the wrong number of decimals for an ERC20 token or something like that that causes issues. So check it's validated on the Explorer and that it's audited, and depending on the protocol, that it's configured in a way that seems at least reasonable. It doesn't have, putting in the, wrapped ETH with 8 decimals instead of 18 or something like that. And
Also,
then,
another really simple one. Again, before you even get to the serious stuff Max is saying, you probably, if you get, if no one else has interacted with the contract on the Explorer, so you're the very first one, that's not a great sign.
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
a really basic. People need to have used it.
And you can also look on the Explorer to that point and see it gets a little confusing when there's a complex smart contract system and maybe they have assets in one contract and then logic in another and governance in another. But you can usually relatively easily, and proxy is complicated a bit too, but you can usually relatively easily find out what contract or contracts they're storing assets in. And then you can look on the Explorer and see how many assets are in it. And so even if there's a bunch of EOAs that interacted with it, if the total number of assets in it is $10, that's probably also not a good sign. So, and again, obviously there needs to be somebody who interacts with the DeFi contract first, but that's generally a good metric to look at. Also,
right. It doesn't have to be you. Someone has to do it first. Doesn't mean you should be the one who does it first.
Especially if you don't intimately understand what the protocol is doing. Another thing that we're starting to see more of, I mean, it's been an issue for years, but malicious UIs. So there could be a totally fine contract that you think you're interacting with, but the UI you're actually interacting with a different contract. And that can be either like a phishing site where you mistype the name of a protocol and they've reserved the mistyped domain and everything looks exactly like the regular protocol, but it turns out it's not actually SushiSwap or whatever protocol you're interacting with, and they're having you interact with malicious contracts. So and again, not all of this is practical for everyone to do on every DeFi interaction, but again, when you're working with large amounts or doing something new, or whenever you can in MetaMask, actually look at the transaction you're signing, see what contract it's interacting with, make sure it's the contract you expect. So if you think you're on the SushiSwap interface and you're going to do a swap, and you see that the contract it's interacting with is a unused contract on the Explorer, you're not actually interacting with Uniswap; it's a phishing site. And so phishing with like mistyped domains or bad links, but also there have been legitimate domains that have been compromised, and then the attacker hosts a malicious version that gets you to approve a bunch of your ERC20s to some malicious drainer contract or something like that. So always be careful. Check what's actually in MetaMask. Don't just trust that the UI is constructing the transaction that interacts with the contract you expect it to be interacting with. And there's one other thing I was going to mention and also on the UI side, there can be vulnerabilities where you are interacting with a legitimate site, but you're linked to it by somebody and they injected something into the website. So there's different types of attacks there too. So don't, read a random article about the best, DeFi farming protocol and then click on a link to it. If you want to use, XYZ protocol, go find the actual site on Google and click or whatever search engine you trust, and click that link instead of being directed to the site by some third-party blog or whatever that you don't fully trust.
One other thing, if you want to be not super paranoid, but a step more paranoid, one practice that I use is I use a separate web browser profile for any, crypto interactions. So normal random, web browsing is either not in the actual browser or at least not in the browser profile. Both Firefox and Brave support profiles where things are somewhat separated from each other. There's no other browsers I think anyone should be using anyway, so I don't know what the other guys do, but some amount of segregating your web browsing from your crypto interacting does help a little.
Yep. And if you want to get a layer deeper, it's never a bad idea to run stuff in a VM. So you can have it. It's a bit of a pain, but again, if you have a lot of assets that you're working with in DeFi, never a bad idea to spin up a segregated VM for it, or even buy, a cheap $150, laptop and throw Linux on it and use that only for DeFi interactions and not anything else that could compromise your host machine and maybe trick you into signing a malicious transaction. And then there's one other thing I was going to mention. Oh yeah, also I'm not going to recommend any in particular. You should do your own research, but there are be careful what plugins you have in your browser, because plugins have a lot of power in your browser and can do things you wouldn't think they can do. But also on the plugin side, there are some good plugins for trying to detect when you're interacting with a malicious contract, or you're on a malicious DeFi UI. And so that's another layer of security you can add depending on which protocols you're interacting with and what you trust and want to allow to run in your browser.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Hemi's new website says Hemi unifies Bitcoin security with Ethereum, or with Ethereum grade programmability, allowing institutions to deploy native BTC into yield strategies while preserving full control and compliance. What compliance standards is Hemi following to ensure security for institutions?
Good question. We talked about this a bit in the past. One of the things, I mean, obviously, we have a lot of internal controls and checks, making sure that our whole supply chain for code is secure. There's always improvements you can make there, and we're continuing to iterate and tighten those. But common sense stuff that separating any sort of private information from any builds and code that are running, making sure you have good separation of access in infrastructure. So only the code that needs to get access to, say, certain secrets or whatever, that only that code and those containers have access to that information. We also do a lot with the actual security of our infrastructure. And so we've had external review. We're continually monitoring and checking on things and keeping up with the best security standards for managing the different infrastructure bits that we run. And, that's everything from Cloudflare setup to how, the process for deploying new builds and, different procedures depending on what the build is and what impacts that could have on different parts of the system. So a lot of internal stuff. And then as we move forward, we are going to start getting more external audits and pen testing and, probably at some point start publishing reports and third-party review of all that as well. So stay tuned for that. But right now it's a lot of thought that went into how everything's structured and how we run everything from what gets into GitHub to what gets built, when it gets deployed, who has to approve it getting deployed, what checks there are before deployment, and then all of the standard infrastructure security best practices for maintaining everything from Kubernetes to all the other pieces that we're running. So I think we went into more detail, I don't know, a month and a half ago, but that's the super high level.
All right. Where are we? How does Hemi validate the security of its off chain components, such as sequencing, prover infrastructure, and operational services, given that these systems can introduce risks not visible in contract audits?
Yeah, good question. So with the initial release, we did get a third-party audit on a lot of the other daemon components, and that's something that we're going to continue to do with major releases. So as part of the third-party auditing, going beyond just getting smart contract audits, we're going to, at some point in the relatively near future, start doing more code-based audits from third parties for non-smart contract components. They are lower risk, but definitely not zero risk. Uh, as far as, so I already covered some of this in the previous question, but I'd say for one of the major things that is a risk is not actually somebody hacking into infrastructure, but there being some sort of a bug in the code that does some unexpected thing and gets something into a bad state. And so one of the things that we do is we have a comprehensive integration test suite for all of the core daemons of the protocol. So being able to test, hey, we have this new update we're making to opgeth or optimism or whatever, and we're able to run it through this whole suite of tests that check everything from, basically deploying a fake network to, depending on what the change is, doing, simulating a network upgrade, simulating L1 smart contract upgrades. So we have that testing suite that's there to basically have a bunch of test conditions of things that could go wrong or things that should be checked to make sure everything's working the correct way. And then we have an easy way to run that in a reproducible environment and catch any issues with any of our daemons in that integration environment rather than, discovering it on testnet or, God forbid, mainnet. Testnet's also a big part of it. So before any sort of major protocol update, we're deploying the candidate code to testnet and doing a bunch of checks there beyond what the integration test can cover. So that's living in a real environment that's, a little more realistic. And sometimes, just things with the way that Sepolia works or whatever, it could theoretically catch stuff that you can't catch in integration testing. So we have that integration test suite, then checking everything on testnet first, and then only once we're comfortable with it, from seeing it run on testnet, doing additional testing depending on the scope of what was changed, then doing a mainnet deployment.
And another thing that we're slightly longer term part of it is as we decentralize things, while yes, the security of the code continues to matter because if the code could get into a bad state, it could get into a bad state. But the more we decentralize things, the less the security of our infrastructure becomes the primary, failure point. You start to have, that's part of, not the only reason, but that is one of the reasons why Bitcoin's so secure, because there isn't one person who's running infrastructure and, you just have to hope they're doing a good job. As multiple independent parties are running infrastructure for something, you start to have, as long as one of them's doing, or as long as some number of them, depending on what the consensus and trust mechanisms and all that shit is, but you spread out the risk in a way that improves the entire system, and that is one of our slightly longer term goals for Hemi.
All right, gentlemen. We are still in the security field, it seems like. What continuous assurance practices does Hemi use, e.g., formal verification, fuzzing, runtime monitoring, etc., to ensure that security holds between audit cycles and as the code base evolves?
Already sort of answered that. We don't do formal verification. There
Could be totally and utterly useless in a system as complex as almost anything. I'm sure there are bits of Hemi that eventually you might think, oh, it would be cool to formally verify that. But for a large, system that interacts with the outside world and the, big, ugly, untrusted world, formal verification, that's not really the place it works. That's for smaller constrained crypto. If you have a small constrained cryptographic primitive, formally verifying that is great. But is Bitcoin formally verified? Is that even possible? Probably not.
Yeah, definitely no on the formal verification. There may be components in the future that we do that for, like some of the ZK stuff may make sense to get formally verified, but yeah, as JCV said, you can't really it's not practical to go and like formally verify opgeth, right? It's a very complex system, and it's not just a algorithm running from start to finish. It's interacting with peer-to-peer traffic on the network, and stuff's coming in, and events are getting shot off, and things are happening in the code downstream of that. And so formally verifying the code base is not really practical. But again, there may be some components we do that on, especially around the ZK stuff. Already talked about, so I think in the question you mentioned fuzzing. So we have some things that are basically like fuzzers, some of the local node or that integration environment for automatically testing new builds. A lot of that is fuzzing-ish. So it's playing through a bunch of different scenarios. What happens if the L1 state advances in this way, or what if it advances in this way, or what if it takes this amount of time for this DA blob to get published instead of this amount of time. So that's sort of a fuzzing-esque like environment. Runtime monitoring, yeah, we have a lot of monitoring on the network. There's a couple different layers. There's infrastructure monitoring to make sure that everything's up and running as expected. There's monitoring of all of the components that should be interacting with Ethereum to make sure, DA batches are getting published, state roots are getting published, everything there looks as expected. We also have integrated with Hypernative, and this is actually also relevant, kind of going back to our previous discussion about smart contract security. So we have monitoring with Hypernative, and if you're a DApp developer who's building something on Hemi, you can also, since they're integrated with the Hemi chain, and they can look at events and do monitoring. If you're a third-party developer who's running a DApp of any significant complexity, that's also something we'd recommend you go and do and sign up with Hypernative and set up monitoring for your DApp on Hemi as well. So you can keep an eye on things, and you can Hypernative and those sorts of platforms can monitor all kinds of stuff, from making sure that the certain functions are not called, or if there is a certain function called with certain data that you get alerted about it, or if there's a change in smart contract governance or a new deployment or a proxy upgrade, or major change in fund balances, or an issue with oracles that you rely on, or whatever. So that's a great way on the EVM side to monitor applications. So we have stuff set up in there for our protocol, and then we're also pushing partners, depending on which DApp it is, but pushing partners to also set up their own monitoring in Hypernative so they can respond to any incidents at the DApp layer as well.
Also, our bug bounty program. I almost forgot to mention that. We have a bug bounty program with BugCrowd, and we previously had one with someone else, but it means that that we have security researchers are constantly looking at various whatever parts of Hemi it is that interest them, and when they see something, they report the bugs to us. And if they find something that fits the program correctly and that is correct and everything, we pay them for it. So Joshua, could you throw a link to that in the chat? But anyway, that is another kind of continual monitoring / fuzzing / checking by security experts. So that is part of our, the continuing security stance.
All right. Where are we? We are here. Has the V2 code base been audited? And is Hemi targeting institutional compliance standards such as SOC 2 for your infrastructure?
So we haven't done an audit on the Golang bits of the V2 update. So all of the smart contract, there aren't any smart contract components in V2, but all of the smart contracts that are native to the protocol running in and post V2 update, all of those have been audited either by us if they're new contracts, or upstream by Optimism, et cetera, for anything else that we're using from existing code bases that we haven't modified. Like I said earlier, we are going to at some point start doing more regular audits on the code base, but for now, we're not auditing the Golang components, but we do have pretty robust internal controls for what gets merged, being able to review everything. Also, a lot of the vast majority of our code base is from upstream Optimism, and so that's already been very well reviewed by everyone looking at Optimism and all of its other forks. So that is something we do want to start doing more formally, but we are not doing regular non-smart contract code base audits at the moment.
All right. Well, what the hell just happened? Sorry, my screen just jumped. How does Hemi handle dependencies on third-party services or cryptographic primitives? And what guarantees can you provide to institutional users about the resilience of these components under real-world adversarial pressure?
So let's see, third-party services or cryptographic primitives. So we've talked about this in past weeks as well. One of the big issues in crypto and software in general, but crypto specifically because it's a great target, is supply chain attacks. And so it's less of a threat as far as we don't actually see much in the wild for like malicious dependencies on the Golang side. But we are very careful when we update dependencies on any third-party dependencies libraries that we're using on the Golang side, that it is a release that's been out in the wild for a while. We're not updating to something bleeding edge that may have been compromised and people haven't caught it yet. And we also do similar things on the JavaScript side, where you really do see a lot more of those supply chain attacks. And there's been 3 or 4 major ones just in the past couple of months. So we do have internal controls for that, and that is a thing that we're actively working on improving and figuring out, what are all the checks and security and lockdown we can do on the build CI/CD process. So we have a lot of controls in there for that, and we're continuing to expand that as we see more things in the wild and realize additional things that we can improve on that side.
All right. And our final question under engineering. How does Hemi secure its software supply chain for both the core code base and the user-facing UI, including controls around package integrity, build pipelines, dependency updates, and protection against compromised maintainers or malicious upstream changes? Even more so with the recent attacks on NPM, such as Sh- Shai-Hulud? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Actually, don't know how to pronounce Halud. Shai-Hulud?
Shai-Hulud?
We'll go with it. I've only read it.
We'll
I
go with
haven't heard anyone say it out loud. Already pretty much answered this in the previous question. So again, we're careful about what dependencies we update, enforcing rules to make sure that we're not updating to bleeding edge dependencies, because that's where, with NPM especially, that's where you see the compromises. Is it's never a 3-week-old library that you're using that nobody noticed anything wrong with it. It's always some bleeding edge thing. So we have internally, developers are careful about what dependencies they're setting and updating to. And like I said, we're continuing to improve that pipeline more as more tools come out to protect against these things, or more best practices or tools that we can use in CI/CD come out. So again, area of it's always going to be evolving and improving, but that's one of the things that we have our eyes on and are careful about, because it is a major threat in the crypto space. And again, less so on the Golang side, but we're also careful with dependencies and not just pulling in the most recent versions of all of the libraries that we're using, because that's where you almost always where you get compromised, is some brand new release that either gets automatically updated or some developer updates it and doesn't look at the release date for that build. So one of the other things with dependency, and I think this is actually part of the previous question that I didn't talk through much, it was third-party cryptographic primitives. So all of the things that we're currently using, all of the cryptography libraries, are well-known, well-maintained. We also do have, this is a little bit beyond cryptographic primitives, but it's relevant to this and other dependencies, systems for automatically scanning our code base and comparing dependencies to any dependencies with known vulnerabilities, and then getting alerts for that, automatic PRs to fix those library dependencies. So again, it's a very multifaceted approach. You have to be careful with what the actual developers are doing. You have to be careful with your CI/CD pipeline. You have to be careful with dependency rules, and then just because you have all that in place doesn't mean something doesn't get through. And so you need proactive scanning and monitoring as well to be able to look at your dependencies and compare those to public, CVE lists and things of that nature.
All right. Our final section today is something that Josh put a TM next to, so I guess he's trademarking this. Max's thoughts. Max, what are your thoughts on encrypted messaging apps, and which app would you recommend, e.g., Session, Signal, etc.?
In general, I tend towards Signal as the app that I use the most for encrypted messaging. It's not without its issues. There's actually recently a vulnerability in Signal that basically leaked a bunch of metadata, and they're refusing to fix it. At least as far as I haven't followed it that closely, but at the time, at least when it was discovered a few months ago, they were saying they wouldn't update it. It had to do with being able to basically just with somebody's phone number, being able to send them carefully crafted malicious packets and get a bunch of information about their device. There were a bunch of timing related attacks. So you could figure out what device they had, whether the Signal app was open or not, whether the phone was in sleep mode. There were things you could do to create denial of service issues with it. So I don't know if any of the encrypted messaging apps are perfect and that I'd recommend, but in general, I do gravitate towards Signal, even despite some issues like that they do have that are, not too much of a concern for the average person, but definitely still not good, especially when they're known and out in the wild. Even if it's just in a academic study initially, there's going to be somebody in the real world trying to use that maliciously, and so that part's concerning, but it's better than SMS. So
Yeah, I was going to say,
get what you get.
even though it said what Max's thoughts are, I want to add to this that one thing it's like people used to say with cameras, what's the best camera? It's the one that you have with you. Encrypting messaging is somewhat like that in that, is Signal perfect or is Session perfect or whichever one you're thinking of? Are they perfect? No. Are they better than SMS and Telegram? Yes. So it's still better than using the others. And the other one is some of it is know what you're protecting against. Signal, for example, which is also the one I use, I use it for all sorts of things. Like it's even if I message my wife, I use Signal. But even though those messages are deeply uninteresting to literally everyone, but, know what you're protecting against. Signal is to protect things in transit. That's it. The device is still for nearly any one of these, unless you find something pretty exotic, the device is still going to be a weak point. And most of them don't do little or nothing to protect the device, which is fine because that's not what they do. You just always have to pay attention to what is the messaging app trying to protect against, and does that match what you're trying to protect against? And if the two line up, then that's awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree. And let's go further and say that Telegram is the worst, and they are all better than Telegram.
Yes. Low bar, but very accurate.
Okay, I have a couple more under Max's thoughts, but we can open them to the entire team. What are your thoughts on the security of iOS versus Android?
Not really an area I have a qualified opinion on. I do like a lot of the things iOS does for security, but I also don't like how locked down it is, and they've certainly had their own issues. In general, I feel like Android's probably less secure from a hardware integration perspective. There's some cool things in the Apple ecosystem, like having a secure enclave in the device that you can use for all kinds of things. And so there's pros and cons to each. I am probably not the right person to ask about that because that's not my area of expertise, but I think I wouldn't say any of them are, obviously perfect. And it just comes down to, what's practical, what ecosystem you want to be in. Some of the other ones like Graphene OS, I haven't done a deep dive on it. Some of the Android forks and things of that nature that try to improve security have been good, but also a lot of those, it's been found over the years that they were infiltrated with government backdoors or whatever. And so sometimes with and again, not saying it's the case with graphene by any means, I don't know one way or another, but a lot of the, really extreme versions of things that try to be, the most secure, private, uh, hacker phone or whatever, end up actually being the exact opposite of that. So again, I don't really have anything on my phone that's that important anyway. So I don't worry too much about that. If somebody wants to get my Signal chats and learn what I ordered from Instacart, that's okay. But yeah, mobile phones there's so many security vulnerabilities, and ultimately I don't think there's really a secure option. It's just managing the best security, or the best secure data is data that's not on a device connected to the internet, right? And so I try to focus more on things like that versus getting overly paranoid about phone security and things of that nature. Not that it's not good to do, but
Yeah, so I'll add a little because I actually worked on a Android fork for a while in my pre-blockchain days, and even then, that was back when Google was a little more open source friendly, where they were still treating the Android open source project in a halfway reasonable manner. And what it comes down to is, number one, even let's say you use Graphene OS or one of the other ones, I can't remember who, but all of the drivers are still the same binary blobs that you get if you use the upstream Android. And no matter what phone you use, there's still a lot of the baseband and the modem software that is completely inaccessible to you and closed. So deep down, no phone is secure. Okay, maybe if you still have that Nokia phone in that picture or something like that, that doesn't do anything other than make calls, it might be relatively, but for the most part, no smartphone is secure. And again, it comes down to knowing what you're trying to secure. Right, like if you know what I, ordered on Grubhub, or, my account on Pokemon Go, that's probably not the thing I'm most concerned with. Is, would I do I do minor financial things on a phone? Sure. Would I do a, very large crypto transaction on my phone? Hell no. That's, putting the wrong things in the wrong place. I have less thoughts on iOS because, I have, poked at Android's guts a little more. And that's not because I thought Android was better than iOS. It just, when I first got a smartphone, only, the phone, iOS was only on AT&T, I think, and that was terrible in my area. So it's just, I learned more about Android's internals. I have deeper thoughts there. But iOS is probably pretty similar. They have some very cool things in there, but none of it makes you perfectly secure. So you have to take some of the responsibility for security is on you. It's to know what things can you securely do on the devices that are out there, rather than finding the perfect device, because there is none.
I would, as a general rule, assume anything on your phone a sufficiently sophisticated adversary could get to. And we see that all the time with tools like Pegasus. So
be safe out there, everyone. We are going to end this session with kind of a curveball question. Okay, seeing the rise of AI and how far the technology is progressing, and also the continued talk about quantum computing, which is more likely to happen in our lifetimes? Terminator 2 Judgment Day or RoboCop?
unfortunately, I've not seen either of those movies. So
Oh my God, really, Max?
We will label this as JCV's thoughts. JCV, take it away.
I'm still horrified that Max hasn't seen either of those two movies. Those are like two of those are both
Absolute classics. And we will be
those are both so
discussing
good.
this on our Signal chat.
Yes, there will be many messages. Particularly, I don't even know which one's more important. They're both so amazing. I don't know. Terminator 2. But I will still go. So I'm more worried about about Skynet than I am about. No, I take it back. RoboCop is the more likely thing. Crazy corporation taking over everything and making a mess of things. So yes, OCP is the bigger threat in my opinion than Skynet.
So
So
OCP would happen before Skynet, in your opinion.
that's where I put my money on.
All right. Oh yeah. Oh, and they have those robot dogs in Boston also. Oh damn. Okay. Our final question. Josh just pinged me because I skipped it. Uh, I'll open this to everyone. I can't believe Josh is making me ask this, but best kind of pasta.
I'm pretty sure whatever I say, JCV would declare as blasphemy. So I'll throw that question over to him as well.
Yeah, you already bombed the RoboCop question, Max. We
Yep.
don't want to infuriate him more.
There is no best kind. It depends what food you're putting on it. Like I would, you'd never put like a nice white clam sauce on a fucking penne, but I probably wouldn't put like a vodka sauce on linguine. So it all depends. What are you making? I need to know your menu first.
Both of those sound pretty okay to me, so that's why I didn't answer the question.
Yeah, he makes a very good point. However, the correct answer is rigatoni. And and with that said, we thank you all for joining us for another Midweek with Max. I have a couple reminders. There is currently an incredible activity happening in the Here server that Alex is running. I believe it's running all month long. Please feel free to correct me on that in the chat. And tomorrow at 11 a.m. EST, we'll be hosting the first Hemi trivia game hosted by Excalibur and the rest of our incredible moderation team. So please check out those activities. Even more activities are coming. Specifically in early 2026, I don't want to say an exact date because I've met you all. But we are working currently on a brand new and formalized Hemi Ambassador program. Myself, John Greenwood, Joshua, JCV, Jeremy, some other folks from the marketing team. We're putting something pretty cool together that I think everyone will like. It have pretty cool rewards, has new roles, etc., etc. That's all I can really say about it now, but expect that I would say in January. Don't quote me on that. Let's say Q1 2026. That I can guarantee. Um shit, I shouldn't have said guarantee. What the hell? I should have learned from you guys. But anyway, yeah, that's coming soon. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the team for outros. I thank you all so much for joining us for another Midweek with Max, and I will see you next week. Gentlemen, any closing things?
All right, awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you all next week. And also stay tuned for the HBitVM white paper and the special breakout AMA we're going to have around that sometime probably next week. And also the Fusaka upgrade tomorrow. So we will all be watching that and watching the activation on Ethereum. If you want to watch along, it's going to be happening, I think, at 4:45-ish p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. And with that, we will see everyone next week.
All right. Thank you all so much. Tune in next week. Same time, same channel. Take care.